Okay, I think things should be good to go. Spent more time than I probably should have fiddling around with webcam settings. Probably not the best time to do that immediately before a stream actually launches, but everything seems to be working out okay as far as I can see. So that's always to the good. And sure about ready to get rolling here, I guess. The topic for the stream tonight ostensibly is working on a potential feature in Override Audit, or at least investigating how easy, hard, uh, disastrous such feature might be. And that is something that would allow the automated reports that trigger in override audit to tell you that you have an expired override to first do a detection to see if the files that are expired have any differences, and if they don't, just automatically freshen them without having to generate the report first. Um, I'm This is something that was requested by someone on the issue tracker, because if you have a lot of package files, and this is one of those features that is driven in override audit by one of the people that maintains or helps Sublime HQ, that is, maintain the default syntaxes that ship with Sublime, having a lot of those syntaxes linked into their packages folder. So every time Sublime updates, everything seems to be out of date, and that's like giant drag. It's the same person that requested perhaps the ability to freshen more things, more than one thing at once. So what we might do is first create a command that tries to freshen all of the files in the current report all in one shot, which you could bind to a key or something, and then cycle around to how to do the other part. So I think with all of that sort of out of the way, we're probably ready to get into the video proper, if you will, or live stream. And of course, keep in mind that even though we do have general ideas for what it is that we'd like to be doing here in the stream, like wishing our glasses would stay firmly on our face. If you have any Sublime Text questions at all, go ahead and drop them down in the chat, and we will be glad to assist where possible, to the best of our abilities anyway. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive on into tonight's live stream. Okay, now we are here in the old Sublime window here, and we need to do a little bit of cleanup here. I just realized because somebody was asking a question earlier in the day, and I provided on the forum, and I provided an answer to that question, and I never provide an answer that includes stuff like this without testing it first. Even when I suggest things like modify this setting, I always test to verify that what I'm saying is probably the correct thing. And if you've watched enough of these live streams, you know that occasionally assumptions can get you into trouble. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this syntax file here. This is entirely something with someone wanted to be able to reuse scopes, and they didn't realize that although this is a YAML file and YAML doesn't support including, Sublime Syntax does. And this is the file that you may recognize if you've watched the latest video on the other channel. And if you haven't, then I would recommend you dip on down into the description of the live stream. I have another channel. And in that channel, we do weekly Sublime Text tutorials. And I've been covering the topic of color schemes for the last few videos, 4 or 5 videos. And we just finished up the main series on that with how to do rules in your Sublime Text color scheme. So those are always nice. This is an example of something that was earlier in the week in the forum. I'll plug in that automatically extends comments, both single line comments and even block style comments with an appropriate level of indentation. Huge props to Keith Hall for coming up with that particular plugin. I has happened to mention to him that I wanted to create something like that because Doc Blocker was causing me serious issues, and he went ahead and wrote that for me. And the thing that I didn't like about Doc Blocker is it had the ability to wrap text like this and wrap it to rewrap the comment. And the version of it that was in Doc Blocker more often than not would just absolutely corrupt the entire selected section of the file into garbled crap. This one tries to do a pretty good job. It doesn't necessarily handle this much white space though, so something like that might work a little bit better. Oh, that's actually a trailing comment. That's probably confusing the heck out of it. See, this is one of those things why you want to make sure you do a demo of something yourself before you go. So, but I was just sort of testing that out when someone asked that particular question as well. So I think we go ahead and jump into the, whoops, wrong key binding. This key binding. Local source override audit, like so. And you may remember from last week's video, this plugin that we were using to track, size that down, the different, or test, I should say, the various new plugin endpoints that are in the latest 4000 series of Sublime Text. These have been sitting in my Sublime window. So every now and then when I do something, when I create a new window and such, I'm seeing those messages down there in the console. So that's a fun thing. Um, I don't know that this is necessarily anything that needs to be kept though, so we'll go ahead and just delete that. And these were files that I had open for looking into those things. I do like to keep those open. Still working on that. So let's go ahead and open override audit.py in this and open this repository, because I think we may want to be, oh yeah, okay, that is something that we put into the show package pop-up when we were testing the new HTML sheet that allows us to display HTML in a tab instead of just in a phantom. Excuse me, I'm apologizing in advance. I have a little bit of a tickle in my throat. Hopefully I'm not coming down with another cold of some sort. Yeah, I'm live. YouTube is famous for reminding me that I'm live. So we don't want that line, which would bring this back in line with everything. Now we do have this change for how context menus work and a change for that, but we are currently on the master branch, which is the same as the stable branch because we just did a release, not last stream, but the stream before. And because the last stream was playing with plugins. So let's say we go ahead and create a new branch here, huh? We'll call it refreshing. Just so that we can fiddle things around as needed. And the patch files branch is something we're probably going to be working on in some upcoming streams. That is providing the ability in Override Audit to generate patches for overrides you have in a file so you can easily distribute them to someone else and they can use Override Audit to apply those patches onto their own files. We have the creating the patches about 95-96% done. There's some edge cases and cleanup that needs to happen, and we're really sort of hung up on the application of said patches because that seems more scary and fraught with peril. And this other one was context menu changes, which is something I quite like, and we want to get more on that. But the thing we're going to talk about here, and we can talk about two things at once, is if we were to look at an override report, let's just pick this one and not the expired one. This report in Override Audit gives us a list of all of the packages that have overrides of some sort and their which ones they are and their locations in the file. Files that are marked with this question mark here are files that exist in the unpacked version of the package, but not in the Sublime package file. So they're not technically overrides, but they may have once been overrides and no longer are. So that's something to perhaps keep in mind when you see one of these in a report. And if you were using this to track changes to a package and you added files, you might want to remember that they're there so that you know to do something with them. So that's why those are in there. I'm pretty sure there's a setting for turning that off if you don't like. Now, there is a version of this particular command that, or this report, that tells you about package resources that are expired. And what we mean by expired in this case is if we know how overrides work in Sublime Text, all of these packages have overrides in them because they are both shipped with Sublime and they have packages in the unpacked packages folder. And we can see that with the pop-up here. We can see, whoop, excuse me, this package ships with Sublime. There's your check marks there, and it's in the packages folder, which means there's a default.sublime package file in the installation folder for Sublime. That's how it knows that these ship with Sublime. And there's a default folder in the packages folder in my regular directory where like the user packages. If you use preferences, browse packages, you would see default in that list. Now, when the package appears in more than one of these three locations. This middle one for installed packages folder is when you yourself as a user, probably using package control, install a package. It's installed as a Sublime package file 99% of the time. Those go into the installed packages folder. If a package appears in more than one of these three locations, I keep moving my mouse off the pop-up, then that thing is eligible to have overrides in it. And basically, no matter which one of those three locations that a package is in, or all of them, they all refer to the same internal packages namespace for files. That's why when you use view package file, these all start with the name of a package and something. These all are blends of those files from those three locations. And if their files appear in more than one place, then they are said to be overriding each other. Now, if a package ships with Sublime and is in the installed packages folder, then Sublime ignores the shipped package and uses this one instead. So if you were to create a python.sublime package file that had nothing in it and put it into the installed packages folder, then that would hide the one that's in the packages that ship with Sublime, and you would lose all Python support. As far as Sublime is concerned, anything you do, you wouldn't see any files in that Python folder. That's very rare to replace a shipped package with something like that, although Override Audit will tell you when that's happening. More often than not, you have either a package that has shipped with Sublime or is in the installed packages folder, one of those two, depending on whether you're doing something with a package that you installed or that comes with Sublime, and a folder in the packages folder. And when Sublime loads one of these Sublime package files, if a file exists in the Sublime package file and exists in the exact same way in the packages folder, then it is an override. So here, the default.sublime package file has a file named regex replace widget.sublime settings, and I have a folder in my packages folder named default that has a file with that exact name, case and all. And in the case of this one, there is a folder inside of the HTML folder named snippets, and that file is inside of it. And the whole purpose of Override Audit is to do things like show us what changes we have made here to these things. And I can even use this to see that I added this, so that when you're using the find replace panel and you do something like this, you get syntax highlighting for the regular expressions that are happening down there in the replace panel. So this file is loaded in place of the other one. Now, Sublime does that automatically. You don't need a third-party package to create those sorts of files. But now that this file is here, Sublime will use this one forever, for all of time, as long as this file is here, no matter what happens, no matter how many times I update Sublime Text, no matter how many times the default package changes. This version of the file is just always the file that's used no matter what. Sublime doesn't warn you that there is an override. Sublime doesn't warn you that your override might be out of date. It just always uses this file. So imagine the situation where Sublime has updated to build 4092, and it's added more options into that Sublime settings file. So there's more things in there. It used to be empty. Now it's not. Now it has settings in it. Well, I have a file in my package here. I'm never going to see those settings. This is one of those things where when you see someone in the forum say, I don't have that problem, have you tried reverting to a fresh state? One of the things that reverting will help you catch out is if you've accidentally created uh, an override of this sort, because it would take away all of your potential changes to files. So the whole point of override audit is to tell you that this is happening, that this file has been updated by the person who created it and yours might be out of date, and all those other things like being able to see what's actually different between the files. If I was to pick this, we can see I added that line, and I could open this diff externally, which in my configuration opens Submerge, so I can do the exact same thing to see that information, and I can easily swap between this file and editing this file and back to this diff and to this one and just back and forth as many times as I like. I could also decide to revert this to put it back to the state that it was in before I made a change. I could delete it. All these things I can do. Now there's one other thing that you can do, which is only available inside of one of these reports, and that is to say if we went to the default package and touched regex replace widget.sublime settings with this. Now, what this has done is change the date on this so that it's 2015. It's exactly 5 years from today's date right now, right? This simulates the idea that back in 2015, I created this override to replace this. And then inexplicably, I used Sublime for 4 and a bit years without ever updating it. And then today I decided I was going to update Sublime Text. So as a part of the update, you have to quit Sublime. And then when the update is done, Sublime restarts. And then, oh, shoot, I forgot I needed to change a thing in there. When that happens, there's a reason why that didn't happen just now. Sublime will, override audit checks two things. It will determine if the version of Sublime that you're running right now is different than the version that it used to be. And if that's the case, then it thinks an update has happened while Sublime wasn't running because it updated itself. And then it performs a check to see if files are expired. And every time you ignore a package, the same thing happens. So if I was to, say, for example, disable the package C++, like so I no longer have C++ support in my copy of Sublime Text. We can see there that it has ignored packages settings and updated to that. If I was to enable the package C++, a package is coming out of the list of ignored packages, and this pops up. This is the same as this report, but it only shows things that are expired. And if I was to refresh this, we can see the exact same thing happening here. Hello, Ashwin. How's it going this fine evening? We'll be working tonight, hopefully, fingers crossed, on some sort of auto refreshy kind of thing. And I'm not entirely sure how well it's going to work. But so this sort of report will automatically be created in two situations. One is if you start Sublime and the version number of it is different than what it used to be, i.e. Sublime just updated. And it will also appear, as you just saw, when something gets removed from the list of ignored packages, because when package control upgrades a package, it sets it to be disabled by ignoring it so that it can update the package safely, and then it removes it from the list of ignored packages. So that's a package coming out of the list of ignored packages is an indication that something has just been updated. And in those two cases, Override Audit will run an automated report in the background. And what it does is find all of the packages that have overrides. And then for each one of these overrides, it checks to see if the timestamp on this file is newer than or older than the source Sublime package file. So in this case, the default.sublime package has a date of like a week or two ago, depending on when the last build of Sublime was, the dev build was output. And I just did a touch on this file to make it appear that it's from 2015. So the Sublime package file is newer than my file. That means I've edited this file in the past, so perhaps there's something that has changed in this file. And this is why this expired overrides report appears only with things that are expired. It doesn't pop in any of these other ones, and it only appears if something has deemed to be expired, so you don't get constantly harassed with this every time you restart Sublime Text. And what you would do generally is something like diff it to see what changes there are in any of those ways that we just saw here. And in the other way, you could edit it instead and then toggle diff hunks with our new functionality to see what's different in the file. You could decide by looking at it that you don't want it anymore, so you could delete it. You could decide that you want to keep the override, but you want to throw your changes away, in which case you can revert it. That replaces this file with a new version from the Sublime package file. So you can use this, of course, at any point. If you decided, I don't want this override, but I might want to make a change again, so I want to leave it in place. Or if you were making an override and it wasn't going the way you want and you wanted to start again, you could revert it. And what you can also do, and this only works inside of here, is right click on this and pick freshen override. Or you can also do it on a package, in which case it does it for all of the expired files in there. And all this freshen does is ask you if you're sure, and then it's going to touch the file to make its last modification time be right now. And as a result of that, it's no longer out of date anymore, right? So I can say yes, and we can see that mark goes away. Now, one of the things we were doing a couple of streams back was a way to prompt for multiple packages in here so that you could hit a command and say, I want to freshen the default package, or I want to freshen the Apple script and the default package if there's more than one of them in here, or I want to freshen these two files in here. And we came up with some ways to get a list input handler to track these sorts of things. But the same person who asked for that asked for another feature, which is also, I think, a good idea and could easily be rolled into or turned into the other version of that, which is a command that you could run in one of these reports that would only happen when there's at least one expired override, which would be freshen all expired files. And it would use this report to automatically freshen all of those files. Now, if we had a command that could do that, then in response to creating an expired override report, a person could hit a key binding or go into the command palette and choose freshen all or something if there was one of those in here. We could also trigger that command in response to creating this automatically with a sort of auto freshen setting that you could turn on. And if we did that, we could also get the auto freshen to happen first and then have this report happen, so that this will only show you things that are expired that couldn't automatically be freshened. And once we have this command, we could also easily modify it using that ability to select multiple files or folders, whichever way we come up with that, providing them as an argument or allowing you to specify all of them. This command, as we've seen in like a lot of things now, could be very easily modified to assume that if it doesn't get a list of files that it should prompt you, but if it gets a list of files, just do it. And then the thing that invokes this could provide it with a list of things that it should just try to freshen and things of that nature. So we can easily add in that extra functionality. So this is one of those examples of taking existing functionality and sort of building on top of it to get new features. And instead of waiting for however long it takes to come up with that final version, we can have sort of a stepping stone in between that this isn't exactly what you want, but it's a pretty good thing for right now, and then we can build on it later and we get more functionality as a result. Frankly, this is one of those things that could potentially be easy and could potentially be hard, because I haven't looked in a little while at what exactly this code is doing. That is still quite hot. Good gravy. I'll leave the lid on that for a second. Now, what I do know is that the diff and the override audit report thing are both running in a thread in the background. Because we don't, it has to do a fair bit of stuff. It has to scan all of the Sublime package files and all of the packages folder itself to find what packages actually exist and then investigate each of those to see if they have overrides or not. Fortunately, that part's easy. If only Sublime package files exist and there's no folder, there can't possibly be overrides, right? If those two things are the case, though, then we have to collect the contents of the Sublime package file and the contents of the folder on disk and compare them to see what is and is not an override, which is how these reports are doing what they're doing. And as a part of this, we're also checking timestamps on files to see if they're expired or not. So it's fairly easy for us to determine exactly whether or not one of these things is actually expired. Doing something with freshening them is also easy. I can do this. This report is out of date now because I freshened that in the other window, but I could do something like freshen expired overrides, and it's going to do all of them. And it actually displays information in the console, if I remember correctly. But we'd have to look back to see where exactly that was happening, if that is indeed the case. I can't quite remember. Here it is. Here's one. It freshened that file and then immediately had to reload it because it changed on disk. If an issue discusses a new feature to be added and it's just one user requesting it, how do we know if adding it doesn't add bloat to the package? That is a great question, and it's one of those judgment calls you sort of have to make as the developer of a thing. And I think a lot of packages and a lot of software in general is really make or break on whether the person that's at the helm steering how things going is circumspect, shall we say, in deciding what does and doesn't need to exist inside of their software as a whole. In this particular case, way back there in the room on that wall to the left there, you can't quite see it. Behind all of those bookcases, I have a whiteboard that has a bunch of stuff on it, and the ability to automatically freshen packages is one of them. It's something that's been on my list of stuff to do for quite a while now. So when that request was made, and the other one, that was definitely something that I already wanted to do anyway. And in that case, it's more of a matter of that and a few other things are things that have been on my list, and now someone's actually asking for it. So now's a good time to slot that one into the development, if you will. But generally, you have to sort of determine on your own if it's something that you think you should or could or want to handle. An example of that actually is if we did, let's see, package control settings for the actual package control itself. This is the default settings for package control. And there's something in here called package name map. The comment says, this helps solving naming issues where a repository is not named the same as the package should be. This is primarily only useful for GitHub and Bitbucket repositories. This mapping will override the mapping that's retrieved from the repository channels. Now, what this means is, my override audit package is named override audit, and I named my repository override audit. And that's not an accident. I did that on purpose. But you might have created a repository named, my cool package, and then when you try to add it to package control, it gets denied because they don't want a package called my cool package. They want the package to have a better name. And in that case, there's reasons why you would want to swap the name of your package from what it appears to be as a repository name to something else. And there's a way to do that inside of the package control file itself, the one that tells package control that file exists. This is also something that would happen if a package changes its name for other reasons. There's a few examples of that that have happened over time as well, where package dev, I think, is an example of such a package. It used to have a different name, if I'm remembering correctly, and now it's known as package dev. And there's information in that package control repository file that tells it that package names have changed. So there's a mapping that happens inside of package control to tell it, even though the name of this repository is this, when we install the Sublime package file, name it this instead. This setting allows you to subvert that and swap the name of something regardless, even if the repository channel thinks that it's not. Now, if you are on the Discord, I think this was mentioned there. It might have been mentioned somewhere else. I can't remember. Actually, I think it was only tangentially mentioned in the Discord now that I think of it. But one of the issues on the issue tracker is the idea that there's a lot of commands in the menu that don't appear in the command palette. And someone wants to make sure that everything that appears in the menu also appears in here. An example of that would be this. New plugin, developer new plugin. This isn't something that exists in the command palette on its own. I added this myself because I create new plugins all the time, and going to the menu is a drag. But this particular package strives to fix that by taking all the commands that should be in there because they're not currently and adding them. And for some reason, it also has some plugin files in it, and I'm not entirely sure what that's about. But in any case, I think you'll know that if you just create a file named anything.sublime-commands, those commands will be added here to the command palette. And it doesn't really matter what file they come from, really. You could name it default.sublime commands if you wanted to. Now, Sublime automatically sorts the list of commands in here so that no matter what file they come from, they're always sorted. Now, this particular package wants to update this with all those missing commands for reasons known only to the author of said package. It's not enough to have it be created as a package with a name like fix command palette or something, or missing command palette. This person wants this to be named default, even though uh, there is a package named default, and that shouldn't be the case. So the installation instructions for that package specifically say, come into your package control settings and modify package name map so that it maps the name of my package to the name of default. And that makes package control install his package as an override on the default package, which may or may not be a good idea, because if you already had overrides in there like I do, that could conceivably clobber the hell out of them. I've never actually tested that sort of thing. But the person that tried that, it didn't work for them, and they made an issue on the override audit issue tracker that override audit doesn't track this package name map to be able to know that this package should be named something else, because his issue was he created an override report and he expected to see overrides under default, and they weren't there. They were under some other package name instead. And I thought about it and thought, oh, if that, yeah, I should totally be handling that issue myself, I think, because if this setting is doing that, and I didn't really have any experience at the time with how this actually worked. I thought there was something more going on behind the scenes. I'm like, yeah, if I'm dealing with packages, I definitely need to be handling this. And then I looked into it a little more and thought, I don't know if that's necessarily my business or not. Because if someone wants to install a package as a wrong name, I think I should only be worried about the contents of the packages folder. And if it's putting it in some other thing, that's fine. I could probably add something to the hover pop-up to let you know that this is actually, name mapped to be something else or something along those lines. And before I could go back and tell that person that that's not something that I'm going to do, they determined on their own that they'd followed the instructions wrong. So that's an example of, what it was actually supposed to do is create a folder named default, but he didn't do it in the correct order, I think, or he didn't restart Sublime after it happened, or you have to add that setting before you install the package, something along those lines. So that's something that could conceivably have caused bloat in the package, and I would have added it until I realized what I was doing wrong there. So that's another aspect of that too as well. But one of the things I really like about Sublime is that John has a very clear vision about what should and should not be in Sublime as he envisions it, and he is capable with impunity of telling people thanks but no thanks. Mm. I have that feeling on the authors of Sublime Text behalf quite a bit. For example, the thing that happened in the issue tracker recently that I think you made a comment on yourself, Ashwin, where someone said the list of ignored things also doesn't include not including node modules and something else. And you said you could just add that setting, and that person's like, yeah, but I want this in the default. Anytime someone says there's a change I could make, but I want you to make it so I don't have to. Immediately, my my dander goes up, the hairs on the back of my neck rise. It's not my job or any other software developer's job to make a change on their end and take control of managing a change like that because you don't want to take a step yourself that you easily could. That comes up all the time with, yeah, I know I could just install Sublime Linter, but why don't you go ahead and just embed Sublime Linter in directly in Sublime so that I don't have to go to the terrible time expense of picking install package and then waiting for 20 whole seconds for the package list so I can type Sublime Linter and install it. That is not a good use of anybody's time. Sublime Linter is a very complicated package, and that that took quite a long time. That's definitely something that should be happening there. So I really like the idea of this. Um, how easy it's going to be to do it is another thing entirely. One thing we do have in our favor here is that all this information that's in this report is actually stored in settings in here. So it's easy to determine what things are expired and what things aren't. So at least I think that's part of the settings. That might actually be something worth checking now that we think about it. Um, I know a lot of this stuff is. Whether or not that is the case might be something that's open to interpretation. Let's go ahead and close some of these things that we don't need so that we can actually verify that. Hmm. Incidentally, I'm really loving this thing here. I'm noticing all sorts of stuff that this is happening in here. I know what the head thing is. I'm hoping that plugins come to merge sooner rather than later. I don't know that I necessarily even have any plugins I want to create. I want to play with creating stuff for things, but having that in there is at least a good step for being able to see what it's doing in the background. Probably really great for debugging as well. Okay, so we're going to leave that open, and go to here, and we'll do this. Da-da. I don't know if the said person felt bad about it. I was just giving an opinion. Yeah, I was actually going to make a comment very similar to yours, what you just said there, rather. Um, I personally don't want node modules in the sidebar because there's like a copy of the internet in that thing. And like I said, I'm working on web development right now, and I'm working in a mono repository that has 13 different applications all inside one Git repository. And each one of those things has its own node modules thing inside of it for its own packages. And then there's one global one at the top that's shared across the repository as a whole. I was having some issues, so I checked out a duplicate clone of the repository to try it in there to make sure that what I was doing was right. And when I was done, I deleted that thing, and no joke, it took my laptop, which has an SSD as its only hard drive, the better part of 15 minutes to delete all of the files in all of the Node modules folders across that entire thing. It was ridiculous. So I definitely don't want that in there. However, I hang out a lot on Stack Overflow. The number of people that want Node modules to be in their thing so that they can go and poke around inside and see what the source for the packages they're including is frankly boggling to me. But I only am working with things that have like 300 packages that they're using or something, so the node modules folder is ridiculously large. If you were doing something small, maybe that's definitely the sort of case where it's not up to the developers of Sublime to enforce that sort of thing. So I was going to make like a similar comment to what you just said there, but free time being what it is, I'd completely forgotten about it until just now. That's another one of those things to keep in mind when someone asks for a thing and you decide if you want to do it or not. Is it a thing that you think should be forced on everybody? For example, I like the idea of creating something that auto refreshes files or expired overrides here, but it's not something that I would just put in here so that it's just always on for everybody. I'd gate that with the setting at the very least so that people could turn it off if they don't want it. And I would think long and hard about whether or not I wanted to um, actually uh, enable it by default or not. So, and for this particular one, I'm thinking that I think it will be a setting, and I think it might default to being turned off. And that's just a gut feeling right now because we're not there yet. That it might, if it has to do a lot of extra work to find and freshen things, that's not something I want to force on people without their knowledge. I'd rather people that are in the know and would benefit from that. And that's a sort of another aspect on that. The person that asked for that, which is Fichtfall from the Discord, and I can never tell if I'm pronouncing that correctly because I think it's German. That's someone that is definitely savvy and knows what they're doing. So if he wants to automatically freshen all files that don't have changes, then I highly support that, right? But if it's a person that doesn't necessarily know I, what an override even is, then I don't know that I want to mask that from someone that might not understand the ramifications of it. Although that's pretty low key, all things told. Man, I got a lot of stuff in this session file thing here. Console, no. File history, no. I probably could have just did this, couldn't I? No? Shoot. Oh, maybe I need to actually. Oh, here we go. Cool. So this is the thing I was looking for. Incomplete sync. That's not one of mine, but override audit expired packages is, and there's none of them. And for the packages report, here's a list of all of the information. You might recognize this from the stuff that you get when you hover over this. If I hovered over, what was that file? I gotta bring it back. Come back, mouse, come back. We'll maximize that up again. The Apple script package has no override. It's not a complete. It's not a dependency. It's not disabled. It's not installed. It is shipped and it is unpacked. That's where the information for this comes from. It's written into the settings of the buffer when the report is created. Okay, you go away now. So that because it takes a while to pull all of this stuff up, right? We can even see what platforms this thing is for, which is all of them. Oh yeah, they all have metadata crammed in them, even if they don't necessarily need some. This metadata information, incidentally, is a duplicate of any package that you install with package control will have a package metadata file in it that package control creates at the time that it creates the Sublime package file, or the package folder, depending on how it installs it, which contains things like what dependencies this has, what name it is, what platform it's on, what version of Sublime it's for, what the URL for the package is, what its version is. That's something that only exists for packages that are installed by package control. So here I'm creating that information myself and sticking it in this so that all of the packages have the same information, even if it's not technically official. So this setting is just the package information. That's not going to be the one that we want. There's a list of unknown overrides in here. There's not a list of expired overrides, though. That's interesting. Now, why did I decide that? These ones are easily distinguishable as expired because they have this scope applied to them, entity name, file name, override expired, because they have this text in front of them. These are the same. These has override unknown, but I guess due to some of the functionality of how unknowns work and need to be used in a couple of different places, we need to track that separately for speed purposes, I would imagine. The other thing that I'm curious about, because I can't remember how I actually did it, would be, go back to my console here for a second. If I went to the, oh, actually, you know what? I should actually quit out of this entirely now that I think about it. Nope. If I was to drop into here, so what we can do is cd into this local Sublime Text directory, and this packages directory in the installation directory is the place where all of our the packages that ship with Sublime are stored, right? This is how package control knows that these are shipped packages. It looks in here. If I took, say, the HTML.sublime packages and copied it to my config Sublime Text 3 installed packages folder, and then went into installed packages. Now, just like this, if I fire this up and we refresh this report, no, if we wait for everything to reload, and then we refresh this report, this pops up to say complete override. This is Override Audit's way of telling you that this HTML package is both shipped and installed. That is, there's a version of it in the shipped packages file, that one that we just saw, and there's one in the installed packages folder. When this happens, Sublime ignores the shipped one and uses the installed one instead, as I said before. You could use this to wholesale replace one whole package with another one if you wanted to. It's very rare that a person would like to do this. I have, in all the years that I've used Sublime, which is like, I guess, 4 at this point, have come across one reason to do that, and that is to test my package to see if it could detect it properly. I don't know of anybody that actually ever tried to do this. And if I was to do the same thing and touch the HTML packages with a date of 5 years ago, if I refresh this, we end up with expired on there. And now it's comparing the timestamp of my Sublime package with the one that shipped with Sublime. And mine is older than this one. So I am replacing a package with something that could possibly have been updated. And I'm pretty sure in this case, yeah, I don't have any support for freshening and complete override. I think all the API that I have in my packages class has methods to determine if something is a simple override, which is these, or a complete override, which is that. And you can ask for whichever one you want. But that's, I think, more or less where the functionality for that ends. And that's an example of no one ever does it. So how much time can we really put into this thing? Also, it's possible to fiddle with these files because they're loose, and that's fine, but Sublime keeps Sublime package files open and thus locked on Windows at the very least, which is why there's a lot of guard code in package control to put things into the ignored packages folder or setting and wait a bit before things happen to make sure that the file actually gets released by the operating system so it can be replaced, which is another reason to not freshen that. So if that's the case, then that's not really a concern here for us as far as that's concerned. So all we really need to do is be able to pull the list of all of the expired overrides, not complete, just regular, and go from there. I'm going to remove that just because I spent a long time once with a lot of weird superfluous packages laying around. For example, this sample.png in here, which is in here for that whole creating patches functionality. So the question becomes, we have a command, we want to invoke it from the command palette. We want it to automatically freshen everything. We only want it to trigger in an override report, but that is pretty possible because one of the things that exists in a report is this override audit report type setting, which is set to : overrides when it's an override report, and so on. It's set to the name of a package in specific situations where the report is centered on just that package. We know the list of those. We know the syntax that it's applied to. So it's very easy for us to make a command that only makes itself visible when it needs to by using that setting to know if it should exist or not. It would also need to be able to easily get at the list of all of the expired overrides. And right now, the only way to do that is to have the report already be generated out into a view. And let's go ahead and do that thing that I just did there a second ago. Let's say default. That one. Nope. Nope. Boy, I'm glad I didn't just, type the same command as last time, right? Like so. Okay. So that's expired. I think the only way currently to grab this information would be to do, whoops, view find by selector. And, well, technically that's the whole scope we want, but if our command already knows if it's in a report or not, it doesn't need to check that part. And it's going to come up with one, and then we could pull the name out. And then if we wanted to know the name of the package that this thing was in, we need to do more work, because you would also have to look for entity name.package like this. And there's a bunch of them in this report. And then say, where in this list of positions does this position fit? The first one's at 45. The next one's at 154. This one can't be that one because this one's too late. It has to be this one. It's the default package. How do you add context menu items only when the view has a particular scope? That is actually quite simple. Here, I'll show an example. We'll say new plugin, and we want an example command that's a text command, and we want to say print hello world into the console when it triggers, right? Yeah, we'll name it untitled. So if I said view.run command example, it does that. And then we need to add something to the context menu. So we go to user context menu like so, and we need to add an extra item in here. Whoa. For a caption of example with a command of example. It doesn't take any arguments, so we can remove that part out. And now if I do that, should be in here somewhere, assuming I did that correctly. This one right here, the one the mouse was on right to begin with. I picked that one, it's there. Now there's a couple of things we can do here. We can say is enabled and say self. This takes the same arguments that run gets except for the edit. And if you return false, then this command reports itself whenever Sublime asks as being enabled, as being false. So it's grayed out. So now it can't be picked from a menu. But if you were to do this, it also doesn't work because this command is not enabled, right? So another thing we can do here is swap this for is visible like this. Anytime Sublime wants to display this thing, it asks you, should it be visible? And here it's returning true, so it's visible. And if I set this to false, so when Sublime asks us, should our command be visible? We say no, it is no longer in the list. In that case, it still works. You didn't tell it it's not allowed to be visible. You just said that it's not allowed to be executed. You just said it's not supposed to be visible. So if you did something like that, then you could say self.view.match selector, and then we need to provide a point for this, say 0, and then text.plain, let's say. So we're asking check to see if the selector given matches at the given point, returning a bool if they match. So right now, that's not in there because I told it it should only be visible when text.plain is the scope. So it's not in there. But if I create a new file, then it is in there and I can pick it. And so I guess to do something more complete with this, you would need to say something like event here and event here. I usually do this with equals none, like so, and then say def want event and return true. And then you get that event argument when your command is executed. Use that to determine the point that the cursor was at, and then use that for this point. In our case here, context, oops, I'm gonna close that. Context helper is the class that I have that does that. It calls window to text for the event that you provide it. It makes sure that whatever scope that you added has that in it, and then it can pull a thing out, and based on that, it can tell things like, is there an override under the cursor? Well, then get its value or not, and then the command can hide itself as appropriate based on that. I also have this always visible argument here because I like my commands to be invisible in some cases and not in others. But someone who wants to just add this to their own context menu might want to force it to always be there. So that's an example of I, in my own override audit context menu in the package, have that argument set to false or true, the thing that makes it hide itself, but by default commands don't do that. So anybody that adds that command, it'll just do what they expect it to do. I think I have an example of this. Now, as we were looking at here, there's a bunch of these, and there's only one of those. Whoops. There's only one of those. And I think how I'm doing this currently is by using the bisect function to figure out what package something goes with. The real question is, why did I try to do that the other way? Let's take a look and see. Here it is in the core. Doop. Oh, that's that thing we were just looking at. Package for override at. So, oh, I guess I do use it for some stuff there. Basically, if it knows that there's an override underneath the cursor here, then it can use this code to see what package is associated with it. And let's close this because we don't want it anymore. The easiest way to pull that off is to know where this is located in the buffer, find the locations of all of those, and then do a binary sort, which uses the bisect function, which essentially tells you in this list of things, where should I insert this thing so that it is sorted? And the magic of that is in the smallest possible time, it can tell you exactly which one of the packages this thing arrives with by seeing, which one it would come after based on its location in the file. And this is written this way so that if there are, say, 200 packages in this thing, and each one of those 200 packages has 200 overrides, it is as fast as it can possibly be to associate the correct thing with the correct place. Um, Incidentally, as sort of a side note, the person, Evandro, who is also add-ons ZZ in the Discord, the person we were talking about a minute ago that asked that question about adding node modules, is one of the issues that he posted is that Sublime behaves poorly if you try to ignore like 200 or 300 packages at a time. And until he made that report, I had never really even considered the idea that someone would have that many packages. I don't install many packages myself because Sublime more or less does what I want out of the box. There's very little things that I need to add on to it. But it was interesting to see that there's someone out there that actually has like a ton of packages that are in there. Now, the thing that confuses me about my implementation here is that when I added unknown overrides, those ones with the question marks on them, like this one, I did it by adding a setting to the view. Why did I do that? I can't remember what my reasoning was for that because I could have done it the other way. It might be because, if anything that requires doing this requires having access to the view. So it's potentially more performant to look it up in the setting than it is to use the bisect, trading off the idea that there's more memory being used for settings. Um, I'm not entirely sure why I did that. Um, it's definitely easy to find all of this stuff, right? As a matter of fact, our context helper has the code that we need to be able to do that. So this is why, for the purposes of this particular stream, I wasn't entirely sure that this would actually be implemented tonight, so much as trying to investigate the best way to do this based on the structure of the code as it currently exists. Each one of the reports that are created are handled by their own report creation class, which subclasses from a background worker thread, so they're all sort of samey. The override report class is responsible for generating two different kinds of reports, this one and the one that only displays expired overrides and nothing else. And that's just an argument on one command to tell it to do that. And then there's another argument that tells it that if you were told to only be expired overrides, then only display the report if there are any so that you don't get harassed. So the one for in order to freshen these things, we need to be able to see if they're the same or different. And in order to do that, we need to do something like diff the contents of the files to see if they're different or not. Or we need to do something else like a checksum. And this is something I've thought about in the past because Sublime package files are just zip files. One of the fields that's listed inside of a zip file is the 32-bit CRC value for that file so that the zip file can tell if it's corrupt or not, which isn't like a super great checksum, but it's better than no checksum. Um, so the idea of capturing the CRC32 value of the local file on disk is easy to do, and then you could compare it to the one inside of the package file. And if those two things are the same, then that is definitely the exact same file, and there's nothing you need to do. But otherwise, the file is different. But it's possible for a file to still, is it possible for a file to be different in a way where it's not considered different, but the checksum says it's different? That's something I'm not sure about. I think my implementation of what counts as different doesn't take line ends into account. So if something used to be a Windows file and now it's a Unix file, I don't think that matters. Is it a good habit to write implementation principles of a certain feature in comments, knowing how you like to write voluminous comments? That is, in fact, part of the reason why I do that, as a matter of fact. Yeah. Sometimes I have the idea for what I want to do, and it's one of those, like, I think I've mentioned on the stream before that I have been writing programs and software in a variety of languages and stuff since back when I was in grade 5. And I have like a ridiculous number of years of experience at writing software in general. And one of the things that gets you is the realization that a lot of the time the problems that you run into when you're solving a problem when you're writing code sort of falls into a samey sort of pattern of something you've seen before. So the very first time you try to tackle a problem that you're completely unfamiliar with, you have to, think like, how am I gonna do that? What are the steps that are necessary to do that? And you got to spend a lot of time thinking about it. And then after you've got, like, say, I've worked at just at the company I'm working at right now, I've worked there for 20 years writing code, 8 hours a day for, 5 days a week for 20 years. You get to the point where someone says, I want to do this, or we need this to happen. And immediately in your head, you can just automatically be like, okay, well, I'm definitely going to have to do this. And then there's this other thing I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to do this third thing. I think I got that. I think that should be fairly easy to do. And you may not necessarily have the full details of what all those changes will entail, but sort of instinctually, if you will, due to all the experience that you have doing it, that this is probably the way to go with it. You never know until you actually do. But sometimes you get to the point where you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. How do I actually do it? And one of the habits that I got in, partly for this reason and partly because I'm not only writing code, I'm maintaining code, and I don't want to come back to something that I wrote 5 years ago and not understand anything. So I don't like cute code so much as I like code that works, that's commented, is try to describe in a comment how I think this is supposed to work. And I'll often find while I'm writing the comment, like, this is going to take this parameter and modify it in this way and return it in such a value, that as I'm writing the description of what I wanted to do, it either clarifies in my mind that how I would do that my assumption was correct, or it makes me think like, oh no, wait, I forgot there's an extra step in here. So personally, I think it's a good implementation habit indeed to create comments like that. Opinions differ on that sort of thing, though. One of the things I rail about at work is the notion that when I write commit messages, I put in here what happened and why it was changed. So I can look over the history of all of my code, and for any one of these changes, I can see what changed in the code, and I can see why that change was made. Why did I extend the bulk diff report this way? It shows unknown overrides in the report, but it can't diff them because there's no base file, and so on. So the questions I'm asking myself in this stream, why did I do that? I could actually get that information by coming, and looking through the Git logs, but that doesn't make for scintillating live stream. The teams at work, if they type as many as 5 words total into the commit message, they've spent a lot of time on that commit message because mostly it's just fixed bug or sometimes even just the name of the Jira story that represents the work, which is probably great if you want to spend your day cross-referencing your Git repository with a Jira bug database that you're searching in order to figure out what the rationale for things was. I find it really hard to follow the code that the other members of that team are working on as a result because they're not writing comments that explains why anything is working. They're not putting any comments in their Git commits to explain why they made changes. It's basically just black magic voodoo. And I guess they're operating from the same general perspective as I am, where if you do something for long enough, you just sort of know it and understand it. Certainly, if I didn't write big comments in my code, I could decipher what it was that I was trying to do. But it's so much easier to read a comment. I think they're deciding that, yeah, why would I comment this? If I wanted to know why this service is returning a 1 sometimes and a 0 other times, I could dig through this code if I wanted to. So uh, it's really up to your own personal preference and how much time you want to spend. Certainly, I imagine I'm wasting a fair amount of time writing stuff down that nobody else is, so I'm probably not as productive as other people. But when it comes time to fix a bug, I bet you I'm faster at figuring out what's going wrong with it than other people. So that is my take on that. Oh, what's this? Oh, false alarm. I thought I saw a red flash of doom from over there, but my peripheral vision is playing tricks on me. So one thing now, what I'm trying to figure here is what's the best way to tie this in? Should the command that generates the override report calculate the stuff in the background to do this and then ship off to do the diff? Is a diff a thing we want to do? I added in actually that thing I was talking about earlier in this. This is a branch of code where we can figure out what files are different between this and the other one. Basically, it diffs all of the overrides and displays them all in one file as a patch. One of the things that's in here is somewhere, I think, unless I discarded that commit, was determining if files are different or not by checking their checksum. I may have tossed that out. I'm not 100% sure. I was sort of waffling on whether it was a good idea to do it or not. I guess I'd have to actually look at that file to be able to see, which makes that a little bit tricky on the whole. Let's actually do an experiment for that. We need to create an override for something. And I guess it doesn't really matter what. Let's say this. I'm going to save that. So if we come back to here, there's one new override there. And I imagine if we diff that, actually, let's do it this way. And we don't have to keep going back and doing it over and over again. There's no differences found in this file, which makes sense. It's a Unix file. Let's change it to Windows line endings and save the file. So now, technically, the file is different because the line ends are different. And when we refresh this, it sees no differences found. I don't know if that's actually an issue or not, to be perfectly honest. Maybe it should be smarter about that. Um, it's sort of tricky because the difflib internally takes a list of lines in each file. So it's splitting them apart by the line ends. So it's not actually comparing the line ends. Maybe I should change that. The other thing that I don't do is provide warnings when there's no new line on the last file, a line of the file, which some people don't like. Or some people like to be able to be told about that, but my diff doesn't do that because uh, the difflib doesn't really provide that sort of information. I think it just says the line is different maybe or something. Let's go ahead and delete that. So create a new, whoops, create an override report. Yeah, like so. So what we could do is have this calculate all of this information. It will have the information, but not write it to the actual report yet, which may also be an issue. But let's say you ran this command, it spawned a background thread, it did all of the work to scoot up and figure out all of the packages, which ones could potentially have overrides, which things actually are overrides, so that it knows that something is happening. And for everything that can be an override, it checks to see if it's expired by checking its timestamp against the timestamp of the underlying package file. So it has all of the information that it needs to be able to generate this report right here, but it hasn't written it out to the buffer yet, which it has to do because it needs to know if it should write to the buffer based on whether or not if it's the over expired only report. It can only do it if there's actually expired things in there. So in between that and actually displaying this information, then at that point we could take the list of things that are overrides that are expired and go off and check them to see, are they different? And if they are different, nothing happens. If they're not different, then we can automatically freshen them. And let's assume we only call out to that function when the setting to do this is actually enabled. Then that command would have to be able to modify the list of files in place so that when it came back from there, if it successfully freshened any of them, they wouldn't be expired anymore at that point. Maybe they could have a different scope for this was expired, but that would probably annoy the hell out of people if they don't want to be able to see these things in the first place. So there's that. Is that the best way to do it, though? Probably is. I would have to say. It's probably the best way to do that. Now, where this all really, it's very straightforward to do all of those steps. Where it sort of gets tricky in my head, the little, the hurdle that my legs are having a hard time jumping over is what happens if we try to freshen a file, but it doesn't work? Which I guess it could for reasons of access permissions. The current freshen code actually detects if or if there's an error freshening and displays a message of some sort. So that's probably something we would want to do. But what's the user experience for it automatically tried to do a thing without telling me that it was doing it and now it's failed? I guess one way to do that would be to just display messages in the console and then those files would still be marked as expired. It's probably the best way to do that, right? I would think that might be the best way to pull something like that off. But like we say, the first, and yeah, that implementation sort of gets in the way of what I said previously, which was, what if there's a command you can use to just freshen everything that's currently expired in the current report? And it could maybe ask you if you're sure. There's a setting to turn confirm on and off, and then just do it. And that's pretty easy to do. And then the original plan was that command could be extended to take the list of things that it should do something with first. And if we wanted this to trigger as a result of the report being executed, then that can't really work, because that command would need to have the report already in the view to be able to do the stuff that it wants to do. And we want it to do it before we display it, because we might not want to display it at all. So doing it as an extra command specifically for this reason won't work, but I think it's still something you want to have happen, because the idea is there's going to be a setting for auto freshen expired overrides on update, or whatever you call it, to make it actually do this, which will default to say being turned off, so you have to be in the know to actually do it. So if there's a way to do it automatically, there should probably be a way to do it manually too, because you might not want to turn the setting on, but you might still want to do it every now and then. So it's still of utility to have such a command. So in that case, it's sort of like a duplication of effort. You need a command to do it, and you need to be able to access the functionality that that thing is using from somewhere else. But I think we're going to piggyback that on stuff that we already have anyway, so that's probably not that big of a deal. That would be my take on that. So I guess the only thing left to do is to actually try it and see what happens. So the real question becomes, does anybody remember how this package works? Does this work yet? I can't remember if this has been updated since last time, but I remember there being definite problems like that. Yeah. And for the life of me, I don't know if this is an automatic package reloader problem or a problem on my end, but it seems like this should work. This should be invoked for me when my plugin file is loaded, and it should be invoking that. And that should work. So my assumption, and the reason that this is going wrong, this is something that happened like a few streams ago. I noticed that this was going all crazy. This call in plugin loaded has to happen here, because this is the only actual plugin in this entire package. It's the only Python file in the root of the package. But there's a large part of the API that is only available after the plugin has been loaded the very first time when Sublime starts, and Sublime invokes this when that happens. So in the core method, we fire up this loaded method like so to tell it, and it does things like load its settings, and it calls package info and init to tell the package info class it's now okay for it to determine where the shipped packages are stored, because that requires calling a method in the Sublime module that you have to have access to the API for. And this code is failing now because none type and stir, it's doing something and it's not working because the shipped packages location is none. Now, it shouldn't be none, because when this plugin loads, it should have imported all of those files, which would cause them to be loaded, and then it calls core.loaded to call this function to do this stuff. And that works unless automatic package reloader reloads, because I think what it's doing is it's over reloading this, and then it's causing these to be reloaded in order. And when this one reloads, this triggers. Then when packages is loaded, it's loaded fresh. So that function call that this one made is just lost now. So I would think that package reloader should reload all of the submodules first and then the plugins, but I don't know that there's a good way to do that. I just know that as a result of this, things are fairly broken for me. So I'm sort of relying on my own reloading here for this sort of thing, which is a bit of a bummer, but what can you do? Um, let's see. We want to create a command that's going to be a file in here. There's a freshen package command. Whoop, don't do that. Do it over here. And this is pretty similar. Here's an example of that question you were asking about earlier. This command is only visible in cases where it's the setting for to always be visible is true, which defaults to yes, or this test happens here. The freshen package command can only happen if you right click on something that's a package and the package name has that expired text at the end of it. So this is more or less sort of what we want. Freshen override, freshen package, I guess freshen all. This one and this one are going to be very similar in their implementation, and what changes is whether you call freshen override or well, actually, the target, the package, the override, if it's a specific override, and you pass a package. So if you give it a package and an override, it freshens one thing. If you call that function with the name of a package, it figures out everything in it that it needs to do. And to be perfectly honest, is this actually doing some work here? It calls that, which does the confirm, and then it goes to override freshen thread, which let's do that and that for the time being. Does it do its own gather here? Get the view, get the package, get the override. It creates a package info for the package you gave it. Unable to freshen, no such package. This might actually be fairly easy to do, because we can just call that thing more than once. I meant to do this. So let's say, because it's what we're essentially doing is invoking the freshen package for every package in the report that has something expired in it, right? So could that be could that be this an extra argument to this command to tell it that it should collect the list of all of such packages and do something? I don't want this to be, it's getting the name of the package directly from the location. So there would have to be an argument to tell it to get the information a different way, and then it is enabled, is visible are going to be different anyway. It's probably more readable. Freshen all. We're going to call it like so. And untracked file. Let's say freshen all command. I guess this doesn't need to be a context helper because it doesn't really need to access. Oh, maybe it does. Does context helper the class that knows about the report type? I can't remember. I think not. I think the name of a package, the name of an override, is it a diff or not, and are we looking at the source code or not? So it doesn't know about that. So I don't think it needs to have this, but we can always add that in later. Freshen all of the expired overrides in all packages represented in the current report so that it's no longer considered expired. This does what the freshen package command does, but for all packages and not just the one, whoops, under the cursor. Does that look okay? Yeah. And that's a example of clarifying in my head what I want this to actually do. So do we, oh, wait a minute. Now that I've actually done that, commands that know various things. Is there something in here that knows the report type of the current view? Whoops, excuse me. Yes. Okay, so I definitely do in fact want the context helper in here. Is that how that was named before? No. Okay. I probably did that because I didn't want that to go into line 80. Incidentally, I learned fairly recently, I guess for the second time, that the order of the classes in this list of things that this inherits from or mix from or whatever is very important. If you put context helper second and text command first, it does not work. Which I'm pretty sure I probably knew in the past because I wrote it this way back then, but it seems very weird to me that I wouldn't have done it as a text command that's also a context helper. That's just sort of the weird way my brain works. So if we want to know if we're enabled, then we need to get the context and say what? I guess this would return none. So we might say return context dot report type, whoops, is equal to overrides to know if the thing is enabled or not. If our intention is to only put this in the command palette and not in the menu, then we don't need an is visible item. But assuming we do want that, then we need something like this in here. I'm pretty sure I spelled that wrong now that I've copied it. It should probably look like that. The description should be, what, do I even need a description on this thing? No, if I want to put it up here in this menu, which I'm not even sure that I do because I don't know that. Oh, it went in the other window. Whoops. Bring that over here. There's not currently an item in here for that. We can add it though. It could be in the context menu, I guess. Yeah, I guess that probably makes sense to do. So it doesn't necessarily need to have a description method. It would probably just be freshen all expired overrides, like so. Just to sort of keep it doing the thing that we want. And then we comment that out and say, refreshing, isn't it? So now we have potentially a new command that will probably be available in the location we want. I'm fairly certain that there's probably something I'm missing about this. There might be a different report type for the two different kinds of expired reports. And maybe we also want it in a bulk diff as well, because that information should display in that case too. But we'll worry about that in just a second. Basically, I guess it could work in any report that is a report as long as it's not a package report, because the package report doesn't have enough information for it to know. It's a very lightweight report. Now that we've done that, we're going to copy that, go to here, and freshen override. Ooh, there's a freshen package. Let's say oh, it's next to freshen package. From dot freshen all import import that override audit freshen all. So we would reload up here the freshen all file, and we need to copy that freshen package to also include here. Save that. So now that is being imported here, and it's going to be reloaded, and it's in all, so it's a list of things that would be exported. So if we did that and then also added something to here, yeah, all right, I don't really like that. Caption, override audit, freshen all expired overrides. And the command would be override audit freshen all. Oh, don't want to do that, huh? That may or may not actually be known yet as an actual command. Now it's in there, so it doesn't appear in there, but does it appear here? No. Oh, yeah, maybe if I did that so that the command actually existed. I can't even. Oh, you know what? I think the whole package might kind of be broken now because I used automatic package reloader. So we'll just go from scratch on that one. Just to be sure. No. That is not necessarily overrides and overrides underscore expired. So basically, as long as it's not packages, is how we want that to work, I think. We want to say that's the thing I just searched for, right? Yeah. That text right there is the thing that we're looking for. It was totally found there, and it was found in that other place, but it was also found in the place where it's actually applied. So that's definitely the correct thing. So why is it not being visible here? Do the other commands? Hmm. Hmm. Do. Let's go to this location. Get always visible. The default for that is true. So not specifying it is the same as specifying it as true. So we set it to false in our context menu. So that's probably not the reason why that is happening. Do. Let's say we print. Whoops. Let's say we let it calculate that and then say print ctx dot report type there and there, and then reload the whole plugin like so. Don't see it getting invoked. I get the sense that something is not quite right with how I pulled that off. That's definitely not doing anything. Now, fresh and all is in the list of things to reload. Quick test. Saving this file. Says hi. So this file is definitely being loaded. Good to know. Put it back to the state it was in. Life is good. But for some reason, this isn't coming through. And again, oh wait, is there a, do I need to put it in this one too? Yes, yes I do. Whoops. I always forget one of them. It's important that Sublime will only recognize classes as being commands or event handlers if they're in the modules, the symbol list of the plugin itself, and there's only one plugin, and that's Override Audit. So whatever this thing imports from here, from lib and from source, needs to include the command classes. So now that we've done that, now do we see it? Yes, except that it's totally broken. Command context has no attribute report type. Is this whole thing been predicated on my not understanding how my own code works? Would that surprise anybody? Oh, I got to give it the arguments too, I suppose. Context helper. Oh, I don't even need the stupid. I can just call it. Right. Yeah. That's embarrassing. Okay. This is a self dot, not a that thing. This is a report type equals self dot report type KWArgs and not that. And then this could say report type is not none and report type is not equal to packages. And then we could also print report type there. We probably want that and that and that and that to be, no, that actually works out okay. That's fine. Okay, copy that. And this context helper class is the thing that knows how to determine what text is under the cursor, if it's an override, if it's a package, and extract that information, find associated information, and all of that sort of stuff. Okay, so all of these commands need the same sort of stuff, so it is written in a handler, a simple class to make life a little bit nicer. Okay, command context object has no. Okay, why is it still doing that? Did I not just fix that in both places? No, we don't need that actually. We just need that. Oh wait, did I not paste that in as much as I thought I did? In this particular case, it's probably even easier to do this a different way, but we'll worry about that in a second. Okay. It's none, and it's not in the list. If we created a package report, then it's not in the list. If we created an override report, then it is in the list. And if we created an override report with only expired things, it is in the list. And if we created a bulk diff of a single package, say, for example, the AppleScript package, then it's in the list. So one other thing that we need to add in here is it should only be available if there's actually something that's expired in here, right? So we're going to close that because that is actually working. We're going to close that. And the report type is that. We need to do this again. We're going to copy that. And let's say expired equals self.view.find by selector. Oops, that. And what we actually want is this. And then we could say that if the report is that and this is that, then we can say this is only enabled if the report is not none and the report is not packages and expired, because a list has a bool method that returns false if it's empty, and this will always return a list even if it's not necessarily empty. So over here in this override report, fresh and all expired overrides appears, and in this one it should still appear rather, and in this one it shouldn't, but it still does. Wait, did I do this? I might not have done that. Okay. Freshen, not in that one. Fresh, not in that one. I cannot type. Oops. That one. Fresh, not in that one. Package report, and we do that. Okay, so that seems to be doing what we want, right? Now what we can do here is this code and this code are the same. The reason that this worked, even though we never changed is visible, is because the command palette hides commands that aren't enabled. It also hides commands that aren't visible. We only want this command to be enabled when you're invoking it in a report and the report's not packages and there are things that are expired. Let's do this slightly different. Let's say if report is not none, then return report is not equal to packages and expired, and move this down. And we want it to be disabled in this case. So if report is none, get the report. If it's not none, then we only say that it's enabled if this isn't the packages report and there's a list of things that are expired, which frankly could be inlined in here. We don't really need this to be here, right? This could just be here. Which has the added benefit of short circuit Boolean evaluation. Makes this one only be evaluated if this one's already true. If this is false, then it doesn't have to do that. So we shave a little bit of time off trying to find things that we don't care about. So that's the report type. If it's not none, then we return true or false, depending on whether or not this is the packages report and there's anything. Otherwise, we return false. So let's just double check that does what we want. And, oh, I broke it. Is enabled must return a bool. Oh, how about that? I gotta say, I'm not 100% married to having such a long line there, but we do what we must. Okay, it's enabled there. I'm gonna save that just to make sure, because I've run into this problem before. It's enabled in that one where there is something that's expired. It is enabled here where there is something expired. It's not enabled there. And if we had another report that was the bulk diff of all packages, which has a different report type yet again, that is still the case. And if we did a package report, then it's not in there because this one doesn't know enough to know how to do that. Perfect. So we've got that. Now, I probably shouldn't have closed that quite the way I did. Return. Oh, let's say this. If report is not none and report is not equal to, we'll do it this way. Let's trim that off. It's just a little bit shorter. This is about as short as it could possibly get anyway. We want this commit thing to be visible if it's always supposed to be visible. Otherwise, it should only be visible if it's enabled. And we don't have to repeat that code in there twice. And now we can say main menu, go to the tools, and say caption, freshen all, expired overrides. And the command is override audit freshen all. It doesn't take any arguments. So up in the tools menu, freshen all expired overrides does not have anything set. And here in this thing, oh, it still doesn't, but even though it should. Oh, maybe I hadn't resaved that file yet. So let's just double check. In this file, it's not enabled. In this file, it is. And picking it says refreshing, isn't it? In the expired one, it is still there, like so. And if I did that, bulk diff of a single package, and the single package was like HTML, then if I went to tools and did that, it's not available there. So that is working. So let's close that and say context.sublime menu like so. And here, I guess we'd put it down in here. Override audit, freshen all. There's an implementation detail that we're about to be unhappy about in a minute, but that's okay. So there's not a freshen all in this thing. There is a one in here, which does that. There is one in here, which does that. And there's not one in here because it doesn't apply there. Now, in order for this to do what we want here, that's good. Let's go to the tab context menu and do this and say override audit, freshen all, like so, and we will tighten that up. These ones have to have these placeholders because they're tab filey things. So here, there isn't any override audit stuff at all. And here in the override report, oh, wait. I would have expected that to work more. Does it have to be a window command to be that? No, it has to be a text command for that. I'm not entirely sure why that one's not popping up. Let's see if it's actually being called here. Okay. It's definitely being called there. It's definitely being called there, but it's not doing anything. Oh, I know why that's the case. Okay. If we're going to do it in a tab, then you need to take, you can't do this with self.view. You need to say view equals self.view target. And I need to remember how you invoke this thing. Give it the current view and that, because it has a little bit of a fallback. Okay. Whoop. And then this can be view, which has the delightfulness of making that slightly shorter. Okay, so there, nothing appears. Here, freshen does work because that's an expired override report that has overrides in it. Here it works because it's doing it that way. This one doesn't have it because that doesn't have, it's a report that it could be in, but can't be right now because there's nothing expired in it, and it's not available there. It's not available there, and even if this is here, it's not available there. Okay, so perfect. Our command is now implemented, except for the part where it doesn't actually do anything. Now, here's the implementation detail on this thing. Freshen override is going to do something in a thread, for one thing. If we jump over here, it's going to spawn a thread to do it. And it has this confirm action. So in order to get this to do what we want it to do, this freshen override has to be able to take a list of packages and a list of overrides in packages, or rather, I guess, a list of packages and then override is a list of lists. And if it's none, then it does the whole package. and otherwise it does the interior contents of that. Because what we're going to need to do in our freshen all command here is do a find by selector to pull the names of all of the expired overrides and then come up with the list of all of the packages that contain said expired overrides, and then pass them in one call to freshen override. So only one thread gets spawned, and it only asks you one time if you actually want to do it before all of that stuff gets freshened. Now, fortunately, the actual implementation of this thing in the thread here is already doing something where it knows how to trigger the touch override command for either a particular one or for all of them. So that is pretty easy to do. And this is also a modification to make here. This is the command that's actually responsible for removing that little red X off of the thing. So we'd actually see it freshening things. Um, so we may also need to modify that so that the list of, what was I thinking there? The freshen thread thing that we were just looking at might need to not do this if it doesn't have a view, just so that we could call it later from the one that happens as a part of generating the override report to begin with. If we did that first, we could use the information inside of that to invoke this method to do all of that work, but we wouldn't want it to try and mark up the file to remove those X's because we haven't actually written that thing out yet. It only needs to do that for the things that it's actually going to write out. So that's probably how we want that all to work, and we've got ourselves a good basis for how to actually do that. However, the stream has reached its termination point, if you will. Um, so, uh, oh, excuse me. Ow. That is going to do it for tonight's stream. I think we really have a good sense in our head for how this is all supposed to work, or how it should work, which is a good first step on this because I've been kind of busy with work and other things lately and haven't really had a time to think about this as much as I would have liked to. So we got to see, normally this is the sort of thing on my 14-mile walks on Saturday and Sunday when I do, like a 4-hour 14-mile walk. I think of these sorts of things and the implications of how I would do various things to decide how I'd like to do it. So this is sort of an insight into how I plan that sort of thing. We got a good sense of what it is we want to do. We need to make some modifications to some existing code, which should allow things we already have to still work, but we can piggyback on it. Then we need to create something to gather the list of packages, and we might need to do that in a couple of different ways. One's for gathering it from the view, and the other one we could just assume we already can just provide that information. And it's going to be a lot easier to pull this thing off and get things working the way we want. So stay tuned for the live stream next week. We will continue in on this. I think that's the plan for right now anyway, unless something imminently more exciting happens in the interim, which is, always possible, I suppose. And if you are watching this live, thanks for watching. Remember, you can always pop into the comment section below, as Ashwin has, and ask questions about what I'm doing or just Sublime plugin and package development in general. I'll help you out with anything that I can. Feel free to drop those questions anytime you want. It doesn't. Don't worry about derailing something I'm doing. I tend to derail myself from time to time. That is not a problem whatsoever. And if you don't like these long form videos and you want more focused tutorials without the rationalization of how these things are actually working or how I come to the decision to do certain things, check down in the description of this video for a link to my other channel where every Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, a new Sublime Text tutorial drops. We just finished up a video series on color schemes in Sublime Text, what they are, the different formats, all the ways you can specify colors with variables, how to create color rules, and even how to build a color scheme completely from scratch. Or if you would rather just tweak an existing color scheme, it tells you how to do that too. And until the next Sublime Text live stream, this is OdatNurd asking you to have a sublime day. Also, thanks for watching.